Thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to be here.
Means a lot to have you here, Ben. We've been working together for over a decade now.
I know we're getting old, Clint.
We are getting old. It's crazy. I met you first when you were at the Governor's Office of Economic Development. It's no longer called that. What's it called nowadays?
Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity.
Opportunity.
Right?
Yeah. I like that better.
Yeah.
Actually, the word opportunity rather than development, right?
Yeah.
Development seems like we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Which maybe we weren't. It actually made sense probably when Huntsman created that, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, we met there when you were working at GoEd, and now you have had a phenomenal career since beyond that. And you're probably leading the most controversial initiative in the state of Utah. I mean, I remember when Derek Miller was getting protested at his office and
People getting arrested.
Yeah, people were getting arrested and all this type of stuff because of the inland port. So maybe we start there. How did you end up in the position that you're in?
Well, we're going to get into all of this, Clint, all the controversy, everything.
I love
that's
it.
Juicy and interesting. So the way I came into this, I was involved kind of from the inception, even prior to the organization being created. Was working with then Mayor Biskupski's office and others, legislators, to really try and say, look, we've got to do something about transportation here in the state of Utah. Mm-hmm. We're all road-based right now. What can we do to try and turn the dial up on making our whole system more balanced, transportation system more balanced, cargo flow, everything? And obviously there was a disagreement. It led to this organization being created. 2018, I was on the board, and I was part of all those protests. Man, we had people coming, screaming. Arrested, and a year and a half ago, the legislature decided, look, we got to do something different. We've got to change this up. Shrunk the board down, went out for executive leadership, said we need a new executive director. I saw a great opportunity, saw incredible potential with this organization, and said, this is absolutely something I want to do. So here we are.
And how are you liking it?
I am liking it. It is different. It allows me to kind of sink my teeth into local economic development, infrastructure development, which is something I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
Getting jobs for people in our communities, the best companies the world has to offer. We need them in Utah. And so playing a role in that, but also helping with things that are helping to clean the air, making sure that we've got a better transportation system. Again, that's cool. Like, this is the stuff that gets you up in the morning. How do we make the state actually better? So yeah, I'm excited.
So what is the opposition to this? I know it's probably environmental and traffic and all, but what is their kind of 2 to 3 main gripes? Maybe we can address those.
Well, I'll start with number one, and this is absolutely number one. When Brigham Young and the other leaders in the state of Utah came in, and the railroad system, which we're very proud of, the Golden Spike being driven up north. The one thing I wish they would have changed, don't put these on the wetlands of any lake. And I don't know, but my thought is, they were probably thinking no one's ever going to use this land, so it's not really productive. Let's put the rail lines here. And it put it into the wetlands. Well, wetlands are important to the state. We've got migratory birds. We've got a lot of stuff happening with regards to the ecosystem that the wetlands in the state of Utah, both on Utah Lake and on the Great Salt Lake, really helped foster. And so the rails go through that. And so it makes it really controversial from an environmental standpoint. I think that when you boil it down, I think a lot of it does come to wetlands in Spanish Fork, where I'll get into, but I think there's also issues with regards to just the conversion of farmland into industrial space, which is a big topic. These are things that you shouldn't just blow past. And so I think what we've tried to do really over the last 12 months is understand these issues, make sure we're going the right direction. But I think that's kind of what's at the heart of it.
So the wetlands, which was a decision made by Brigham Young.
Some of them, I don't know.
Or somebody like that far
somebody
back.
Somebody in charge.
But now how do you navigate that, though? How do you navigate and kind of assuage the concerns there and protect the wetlands while you're doing this?
Well, think about this first, and anybody listening can think about this exercise for themselves. How often would you ever think about using a train in the state of Utah?
Never.
everyone thinks about a car.
Yeah.
And that's what we've become. We've become a society that literally is built on the roads. And so as you look at any of the roads that are built out, it's almost like a river with the brush that grows up right beside it. When you build roads, you get the development that comes along with it, and you can see it visually. So we've become a very road-based society. So now the thought is, look, if we're going to change that, if we're going to help clean the air, get trucks off the road, and I'm not being dismissive of the trucking industry at all. We love the trucking industry, but we've got to grow smarter. Then that means we've got to identify rail as a solution. We just got back from a tour in Europe. They get this. Germany, I mean, they understand this. This is something, these are concepts that are very well understood. We have become so dependent on the road. In fact, just a stat that's interesting to me, 92% of air cargo that leaves the state of Utah actually does so on a truck. And it's shipped to LAX or to Denver or a neighboring state because we don't have the capabilities at the Salt Lake International Airport. We're sending every cargo container right now that needs to get on rail. We send it to the Northwest Quadrant of Salt Lake City, underprivileged community, underrepresented, and we're sending all our trucks right into the heart of that. I mean, we talk about air pollution, all these other things. There are system failures that are really hurting us in terms of how we're able to grow. And I think that's what we're focused on, is how do we build out a system now that's going to better accommodate cargo, rail, all of the above, even air, so that we're not just putting trucks on the road and just dependent on road for our transportation.
Maybe the first question I should have asked you is, what is an inland port?
Well, that's where I was thinking that would be the first question. So
I think it confuses people, an inland port, right? It kind of seems like an oxymoron, I think, to some people.
It does. And so an inland port, it is its most basic premise. An inland port is an access point. It's a transition point where you put something, take it off a truck and you put it on a train. That's really what an inland port is. It's a rail terminal. It's a rail transfer station. And so once you understand that, you understand what we're trying to do throughout the state. We're trying to build a whole system of inland ports so that you don't have to send all your cargo to the Northwest Quadrant, but you can put it on the rail in Spanish Fork or Box Elder. And that's not only more sustainable, but I think it really helps those who are underrepresented in the Northwest Quadrant. So,
well, don't we have a pretty robust rail system in the state of Utah? I always wondered, is it being used, particularly as you go down to Price and Helper and these types of folks? I'm like, man, in fact, I was thinking how cool would it be to just travel down to Helper for a night and there's you can have dinner on the train and stuff. I love all that type of stuff. It's kind of this nostalgic stuff, but is it robust or is it just not being used or?
Well, to answer that question, think about how being used, how utilized our roads are. You get in the car now, you're stuck at traffic lights, you're on I-15, you're in traffic, totally overutilized. Our rails, we've got rail all over the state, totally underutilized. So not only for cargo, but think about if we had high-speed rail, 200 miles an hour down to St. George, or to Vegas, you could get there in 2 hours to watch a football game.
That'd be so cool.
Roads that are way, way overutilized, rail that we've got a lot of it and nobody's using it the way that we could. So,
yeah. And so I understand that. And then you had this lawsuit with Salt Lake City. Did this predate you, or are you still dealing with that?
No. So this is the premise for all of this, right?
Yeah.
We've got wetlands that we're dealing with, environmentalists. We've got people rioting at Derek Miller's office at the Salt Lake Chamber, all this bad stuff.
Yeah.
And in the middle of this, you've got this lawsuit with Salt Lake City as well. Part of it was because I think people didn't know what the inland port was. They didn't know what it was trying to accomplish. And so the lawsuit was filed several years ago. I'm very proud to say we were able to get it dismissed. We're now working with Salt Lake City. And more importantly than that, though, I think we're working in a way that people understand what the vision is. And maybe that's something that's worth talking about. But people understand better the direction that we're going. So I think that's what we're trying to convey and get the word out about, is exactly what it is that we do as a governmental organization and why it's a benefit to the citizens of the state.
Yeah, what is the vision? You should explain that.
So let's talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, tell me what the vision of this thing is. And by the way, just real quick, as we talk about Salt Lake City, how's Mayor Mendenhall? Has she been a good partner in all this? I really like her.
Yeah.
I think she's great.
Well, here's my feeling. Like, if you treat people with respect, I think they're going to treat you with respect. And she is an amazing thinker and a great leader, a great visionary for the city. And so I think as we've really established a great opportunity to respect each other, I feel like the relationship's improved immensely. I can't speak for them, obviously, but I think we're having conversations. They actually, came in, were part of our legislative rewrite. So good things that are happening there for sure. But, this bigger vision, what is it the Inland Port is all about now? Well, so let's take a step back. Go back to 2004. Governor Huntsman comes in. This is the last time you have a major update to the state's economic strategy. And it all revolves around not just him and his philosophy, but it specifically introduces this incentive tool, EdTIF. EdTIF reshapes the Utah economy. Without EdTIF, we don't have Adobe. We don't have Goldman Sachs.
What does that stand for, EdTIF?
It's the Economic Development Tax Increment Finance.
Okay.
And in simpler terms, it's an incentive. But it's the hook that we have to put on the table whenever we want to bring these companies to the state. Boeing, Qualtrics, Northrop Grumman. It's what we use to help get these companies here. If you don't have that, they've got 100 other sites in 50 other states they can go to. So it made us more competitive. Governor Huntsman helped us to become more sophisticated as a state. Well, it was such a good tool. I think it worked dramatically well even throughout the Herbert administration. When I was in the governor's office, it really allowed us to level up as a state economically. But here we are in 2023, and we're in desperate need of another economic, philosophy revolution. And so as we're looking at this and what that entails, what we're talking about now is collaboration between local governments, the state, and what we're able to accomplish together.
Yeah.
Now, the problem early on was it was forced between Salt Lake City and the port. That wasn't a good idea. And so what we're doing now is tell us what your vision is. Tell us what your strategy is. How do we work on infrastructure and logistics up front? How do we bring to bear not just the state resources and EdTIF and these state incentives, but also local resources with local property tax? Clint, this has been tried in other places. It's failed miserably because nobody can get people to work together. And here in the state of Utah, not only are we getting people to work together, but we've got a list probably of 15 to 20 cities now and communities that want us to come in and work with them. This is totally unprecedented nationally. But that that focus on infrastructure and incentives and working together, collaboration is the magic sauce.
So is the idea now like it's not going to only be hubbed in Salt Lake City, it's going to be hubbed throughout the state of Utah. And so how does that work? Like, I think that's right. You mentioned Spanish Fork a few times, which obviously I'm from and love Spanish Fork, and we're 10 minutes from Spanish Fork. Spanish Fork's getting bigger than Provo. Spanish Fork is like not even the same place as when I grew up, right? Like the growth of that thing has been incredible for both good and bad, probably. But how do you do that? Like, how do you make Spanish Fork part of Box Elder, part of, St. George and all these various places in the state?
Well, think about it like this. If you had to drive up to Salt Lake City right by the airport to get on I-15, would it really work? Of course not.
Yeah.
If you don't have better access points for rail throughout the state, then you're not going to be able to have a really effective hub. And the way I like to think about this is mass transit for cargo. I mean, if you think about Front Runner, it's doing amazing things, but we need to do the same thing for cargo. So you can't do that if you have to drive it all to the same place. So we have to make rail more accessible throughout the state. So what we do, and here's the model, and I think the magic, is when communities are ready to welcome us in, they have to adopt a resolution saying, we want you to come in. Let's take Spanish Fork as an example. They adopt a resolution. They say, we want you to come in. We identify a specific acre or specific area, let's say 500-600 acres, whatever it is. It's already zoned for industrial. It's ready to go. We come in and we say, okay, we're going to be able to have access to the property taxes to reinvest. We're going to bring some state monies as well. We're going to bring marketing for the site. We're going to bring everything we can help. Hopefully there are land developers that are willing to be part of this as well, as this is the case in Spanish Fork. So then we have all these tools at our disposal to create what's really an economic focal area. Part of that economic focal area is an access point for rail. So whether it's a bigger terminal or even just a basic loading facility that doesn't look like anything great or grand, but now you've got an access point, you've got everybody working together, and we're now able to really handle or bring together all these resources to bring in the right companies, make sure we're creating higher paying jobs. Should there be a research component? Like all these questions that if Spanish Fork is left on their own, they're an amazing city, but they'd never be able to do all of this. But we bring all these resources together, work together, and what we can create is an economic focal area where now instead of having to drive into wherever to find a job, you've got good economic opportunities. I love that word, opportunities, all throughout the state. So that's kind of how the model works, more or less.
How are you finding that much land in Spanish Fork?
Well, so it's all on the west side of I-15. And
okay, so you're talking like Benjamin and Palmyra and Leland, or what is it? Is it Leland?
Yeah.
Lakeshore, actually. Sorry. They're not going to like that.
Well, so Spanish Fork has welcomed us in. They've given us a resolution already.
But isn't that unincorporated?
Yes.
Part of that is like it's not part of Spanish Fork, and some of it is. I've actually never really understood that because we owned a farm. I don't know if you know this. Actually,
I did not know this.
We had a farm in Palmyra, so I know the area very well. Okay. Yeah. I didn't have a farm. My grandpa did, and obviously, and down to my dad. But that area is very much farm area, and I think you need like 5 acres to even build a house on it, right? And things like that.
I don't know all the zoning requirements, but you're exactly right. And so this is all part of incorporated Spanish Fork City, to your question. And there's a lot of historical farming that's gone on. And one of the concerns we've heard with this project in particular is that conversion from farmland to industrial space. Mm-hmm. It's something we're sensitive to. And the reality is if you have a farmer that wants to sell that does not see an economic future in farming and they sell the land, it's hard to say, well, no, farmer, you're going to continue to farm it or whatever it may be. So we let the free market take care of that. So we're not going to hurry or hasten the conversion of farmland into industrial space. But at the same time, where it has happened, and we do have zoning in place, we've got developers in place, now we've got an opportunity where we can really create an economic focal area. And Clint, I really believe this. I think economically, and you know Utah County so well, and the economic history of this county, especially over the last couple decades, this area in Spanish Fork economically is going to be one of the most important parts of Utah County 20, 30, 40 years from now. Yeah. And I think the reason we can say that with some degree of confidence is people are working together. You got people working in silos. You might be able to have an industry that really blows up, but when you get people working together, then you can force and create. And that's really what we need more of. And so economic diversification, we talk about globally what's happening in advanced manufacturing, which is probably a topic worth discussing, but globally what's happening in advanced manufacturing, this is a moment we haven't seen in 40, 50 years where we're able to recapture manufacturing for the United States. Every president's promised this, none have delivered. Yeah. And we see this happening before our very eyes. This is a pivotal moment and we've got to be ready to capture it. And I think that's what we're focused on.
What is the biggest pushback you're getting down from the farmers out there? Because I imagine, like you said, there's probably some that, have had it for a generation or two and are like, yeah, let's get out of this thing or let's go down to San Pete County or whatever, right? Yeah. But I imagine some are digging in.
No, this is a place where all of the land that we're looking at has already transitioned. Developers already own it.
Oh, okay.
But Clint, to your point, what we are getting opposition from, and this is where I really see opposition, is those who are concerned about the disappearing farmland. And it's a very legitimate concern. And so we've heard from some administrators or some professionals at BYU, others who really pay attention to this. The conversion of farmland to industrial is something that the state has to wrap its head around at a much higher level. Mm-hmm. By the time we enter the picture, those decisions have already been made. The farmers have already sold it off, and developers are looking to build. But in terms of our food scarcity and our food dependency, it's something that the state has to take seriously. And so we're not dismissing that at all. It's a very serious topic. It's unfortunately one that we can't do a whole lot about, but what we don't want to do is move in and hasten that or, make land more valuable. We won't do that. We'll only move in where all that's already been decided.
What is it like? So Utah County, for those who don't know, is run by 3 commissioners, the county commission, where Salt Lake County has a mayor, a council, and all that type of stuff. And I don't want to get you in trouble, but what's it like working with the commission versus working with a mayor?
Colin, I'm gonna have to. I'll bite my tongue because it could get me in a lot of trouble. This has been a hot topic. Davis County even's had this debate the last couple of years: the mayor versus the commission.
I was on the Utah County Commission that studied whether we should move to mayor council format or stay on the commission. unanimously, all of us on that commission was like, yeah, we should obviously do the mayor council thing. Like, it wasn't even like really that close. And like, I didn't have any preconceived notions on like which was better anyways, but as we looked at it, and then immediately it got shut down, like that didn't happen, which was like a waste of 6 months.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say this. I think the more dispersed and diverse representation you can have with a lot of different representatives that represent a lot of different parts of the county, but then you have paid administrative people who really day to day can handle the running of the county. Like, those are the models that we typically see best. I think the elected, where you force your elected official to also be an administrative official, is and I'm not saying making decisions for the county, that belongs with elected officials, but the implementation and the day-to-day aspects, you get people who really know what they've done it their entire careers. It just makes for a more fluid government. But I'm not dismissing Utah County's government at all. I think the commissioners we've worked with down here, Commissioner Gordon, and the other commissioners, have been absolutely great to work with. They have a wonderful vision. I would say the argument you can make for the commission side is then you get people you're electing that directly implement the vision as well. Plus and minuses almost.
Yeah. I mean, you know exactly who's in charge too, which is really interesting. That you can't like have the mayor can't say this was a council thing, or there's no there's not as much pointing fingers with the commission thing, which is kind of interesting.
Well, and we get this question all the time. They're like, are you government? Are you non-government? Like the Inland Port, like these special entities that are being set up, like the Point of the Mountain, like the Utah Lake Commission. They kind of they sit in their own hybrid category where they're not local. They are kind of, but they're not state, but they are kind of. Yeah. And so it creates a really, really difficult governing because nobody's sure who's in charge on really important aspects. Yeah. And so that's where it's like, I like to be out and I like our board to be out because people need to know who's running this show and who to hold accountable.
What's this advanced manufacturing boom that you're seeing? So
this is something, Clint, that I think people probably aren't aware of the way that we could be or should be. But I mean, for since the 1960s, one of the things I teach a class at the University of Utah, one of the things we talk about is the historical migration of manufacturing jobs, the disappearing middle class. How do we really embolden, the middle class here in the United States? Utah's done a good job with this, one of the few states that has. But manufacturing and the ability to build stuff became readily apparent during the pandemic. The fact that we couldn't do it, we couldn't keep up. We were bringing all of our goods and services in. It created a situation, an environment where we saw immediate policy changes that changed the game. Part of this, I would say, love Donald Trump or hate him, was absolutely facilitated by Donald Trump's trade policy and what he was negotiating with China.
Oh, interesting.
So those two things combined play into each other, and all of a sudden there are policymakers that are like, wait, we can't depend on China for PPE and other critical equipment that we need. And so, something we were working on, Josh James taking a plane over to China to pick up PPE.
Those were the craziest days.
They were the craziest days. And so I think there was a recognition, and you saw immediate policy changes where we said, look, this has got to be American made. The policy, the whole concepts, the whole thinking around what we do and what we're dependent on other countries for changed almost overnight. And so we saw this boom where all of a sudden biotech manufacturing was coming back to the United States, aerospace even, other industries that I don't think anybody would have thought, hey, we're ever going to see those industries in this country again, are now migrating back to the United States because of Buy American and other provisions that are now policy. And so we are seeing this whole global recalibration of the manufacturing supply chain and industry right now. And Utah has a very unique opportunity. We're close to seaports, but we've got great workers here in the state of Utah. There, before I left the governor's office, we could have recruited 300 companies, manufacturers, if we would have had enough workers for them, because everyone wanted to be in the state of Utah. Good operating environment, great schools, just everything that's a good environment for manufacturing. So we didn't get all of that, obviously, but now we've got a chance to capture some of those things. So I'll share this anecdotally. 2 weeks ago was part of our trip to Europe. We met with BioMariU, and here's a company that has invested significantly in the state of Utah, both manufacturing, research and development, just about every way you can invest. And I don't know if they want me to disclose this publicly or not, but they've made a lot of hires since the beginning of this year, probably more than anybody else in the state of Utah.
Oh, wow.
But they've done it really on the down low. And biotech, food manufacturing, all these companies have very silently, kind of, I don't think people have really been taking notice, have really started to increase their presence here in the state of Utah. But a lot of that comes back to shipping. And look, can I get my goods to a global marketplace or not? And again, that's where we come back to, if all we're doing is trucking, then we're not going to stay competitive with other markets. So.
How has the trucking industry responded to you?
Honestly, the trucking industry right now with workforce shortages, and let me just say this, we've got the best trucking industry in the country here in the state of Utah. Our trucking companies are amazing. What they did and pulled through during the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if they would say this, but publicly, but I think they would acknowledge they're even getting stressed. Like, we have the highest rate of trucks on the road in the country. And so in Utah, we have higher percentages of trucks than any other place. And so I think even as the trucking industry, they're getting stressed. And as I said earlier, we're not trying to put them out of business. We're just trying to create better balance. If we can change it 5%, then we're going to take pollution out of the air. And I think we're going to create a better environment for shippers as well. So.
I think something that like freaks some Utahns out, particularly like those who've been here for generations, right, is just the whole idea of growth. Growth is like really, really scary. And I think a lot of folks would be like, well, let's just stop growth and let's even reverse it. But in reality, obviously, that's not possible. There's no slowing this down. It's just how we're going to grow and the best way to do it. So how do you think we overcome like this challenge of like, probably, I don't know if it's half the population, a fourth of the population that just like, actually, this isn't even the Utah that I want to be a part of, right? So how do we maintain what's great about Utah while also without any choice of no one person or entity could stop this growth? It's coming, and most of it's coming internally, as you know.
Yeah. Most of our growth is from our own kids. And, in addition to the wetlands, that was the other thing I was going to mention. A lot of this just comes back to just we're not ready for it. We don't want it. We feel overcrowded. And look, there's a reality there. We are getting really crowded. And, when we have days where we have to tell state workers, look, don't come into work because we don't need any more congestion in the air. Like we're getting to a pretty critical boiling point here along the Wasatch Front. We've got to learn to grow smarter, but people have to see that. I think how we talk about density, how we actually help cities achieve that in a very positive, productive way that people can live with, those are conversations that are really meaningful. The state makes a lot of policy adjustments every year to try and help accommodate growth. I know Speaker Wilson, Governor Cox, President Adams, this has been their number one issue for the past, decade and people before them. But the question of how we grow, and Clint, what you raise is a really interesting point, because the people who say, let's stop, close the door, build a wall, let's not. Yeah. I understand where they're coming from, but trying to stay stagnant and trying to keep things how they are is an absolutely losing strategy. Detroit has tried that. It didn't work well for them. Other communities, other states have tried that. It didn't work well for them. And then on the flip side, you've got Austin. They got way too big, way too quick. You've got other, especially tech-oriented cities, Silicon Valley, others that just got way too big. You got people living in their Teslas.
For sure.
And so you've got this spectrum of how do we really want to grow? Well, the reality is, unless we have people that are really willing to step up and say, look, we've got to do this the right way. We've got to be more targeted with the types of jobs. We've got to be more targeted with the types of growth. We got to be more targeted with water. I'm going to tout this because I zero-scaped my entire front lawn last year. Cost me a grundle of money, but we're wasting a lot of water on front yards. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do way smarter than what we're doing right now. And I think people feel that burden of growth because we're not using our resources as efficiently as we can. And I would say that's water, that's roadways. And until we can better use underutilized rail to create more capacity on road, until we can not use all this water to water our lawns, we're not going to be nearly as efficient as we are, and people are still going to feel that pain. And so I think we've just got to be smarter, and I would say the state leaders are absolutely focused on that. Sometimes it's the citizens that don't want it, and they just want their green lawn, and they want their half-acre lot or 5-acre lot.
Sure.
And so that's where we get into this difficult battle. And personal anecdote, out in our city, in Layton City, there was a really great plan that was adopted. This is 2011, 2012. And it was perfect for, growth and what we needed to accommodate West Layton, people and growth. And the citizens voted it down via referendum and voted a couple of the city council people out of office. And so we start getting into those kind of conversations, and it's like, well, what is it that we want? How do we find solutions we can agree on? So
to me, it's like a leadership problem, first and foremost, or a leadership issue. I don't know if it's a problem, but where leaders need to better explain that this growth is not stopping. I think that's the first message that needs to get out actually to the state and a lot of these folks is like, yeah, let's try to stop it. What's your plan? How do you stop this? Again, most of the growth's internally because we're having tons of kids. We want our kids to stay here, all that type of stuff. Do you want these companies that are homegrown to leave? Right? Like there's like all of these, like a lot of this is homegrown. I mean, Qualtrics was built in Utah, right? Domo's built in Utah. The Adobe building's there because of a company that was built in Utah, right? Like, do we not want that to happen? Do we not? And how do you stop it even if you wanted to? And I think the one of the really key message, I think, for some of our elected officials to start saying is like, we don't have a choice. So we got to figure out, the argument's no longer should we grow or should we not grow. We're growing.
Yeah.
No choice there. Yeah. Now the question is, and the argument, which I think is a good one, is how? Yeah. And what's the best way, right? Yeah. And I think that's the way it needs to be positioned.
It is, and we've got to change the narrative. The narrative really has to be it's coming, and we've got to be able to control it. People who hate warehouse distribution, well, that's the new retail model. Yeah. I mean, there's a reality there. It comes with growth, innovation, disruption. But even in terms of, you look at Qualtrics or Domo, these companies, tech companies in particular, you look at the multiplier effect, and you look at the fact that, construction workers have jobs, and, gas station attendants have jobs. The downstream impact from these types of businesses is so critical for our economy. Mm-hmm. So if we start shutting down, let's say we just stopped offering incentives, or we stopped blocking from these companies from coming in, the unintended consequences would be catastrophic to our state and to the people who live here. So whether people want it or not, it is coming. It has to happen. The question is, I think you framed this really well, Clint. Can we develop the narrative to say, what's the right ways to growth? How can we more efficiently use our resources? Yeah. And I think the more we're willing to have those conversations, I think the more we can start to change the narrative. And I don't mean to say this in a mean way, but we have to be able to isolate those who are not willing to moderate and conform. That's a phrase we've heard a lot lately. Mm-hmm. But those who just want to stay on the fringe and say, I'm going to fight against any kind of growth, it's like, well, but if we can educate the majority of people and help them understand, I think we can get to a place where you can shape policy more effectively. Yeah. But if it's just a battle, it's going to be a battle, and it becomes a culture war issue, and it tied to so many other things that are not effective and just drag us back. Yeah,
and like I said, I think there is interesting debates in the conversation of how do we grow. Yeah. I don't think it's interesting or even worth anyone spending time on should we grow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's like no choice. Yeah, like this is happening. This is life. It's always changing, and Utah's growing whether we like it or not. There's no stopping this. I mean, this decision was made in like the mid '80s. Like, there's no choice. Here we go.
What is no growth? Is that it? And I'm again not knocking anyone or anything, but I mean, China's policy for one child. I mean, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
is that what you want? Yeah.
It doesn't make a lot of sense, and particularly the people who are anti-growth would not want that. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Which is like the interesting piece of it. Yeah. You just got to hope like Montana doesn't start growing or something like that. Like keep some really great West state, entirely wild. But I don't think Utah has any choice here for the most part, particularly along the Wasatch Front, which brings us to the point of the mountain. Mm-hmm. And this probably the most important construction project in the country. That many acres on that close to a major highway, that close between two major cities. It could be the epicenter of Utah in 20 years from now, right? And you're not even Salt Lake City. It could be right there. Mm-hmm. Some might argue it already is. Yeah. Right? Just given like Lehigh and Draper and everything they're already doing. You add on to that, my word. How do you think that's being handled? I know I don't know how involved you are in it, but I know you've been involved in it in some way.
Well, let me say this. One of the things I talk to my students about all the time is when you go into a new community, a city, whatever it is, it's like reading a book. And how you read the story of any city or market or community, one of the key indicators is not just like unemployment rate, but it's investment. Mm-hmm. Where's the investment happening? When you see investors that are willing to invest in office space around one core nucleus, like we're seeing at Point of the Mountain, you're seeing a feeling from the investment community that that's a safer investment than downtown Salt Lake City right now, where we've had less office growth than what we've had at the Point of the Mountain. So I think in terms of its gravity, you're already seeing that pivot point. You're already seeing that start to change. Tech is so important, not just to the point, but to the state's economy. When you look at what tech brings to the table in terms of not just multiplier, this is going to provide job opportunities for our kids that we never had, quite frankly, and maybe to a certain degree because we're kind of caught in that Generation X, generation or millennial gray area. But, a lot of people never had these economic opportunities. They had to go to Silicon Valley. They had to go to New York. They had to go wherever to try and find these jobs. We have them in Utah now. That's something we absolutely have to promote and safeguard so that we don't continue to export our students. Clint, that was one of the things that story was not being told. For a generation there, 80s, 90s.
You had to leave.
You had to leave. And now that's changing, and the opportunities here are tremendous. And how the point plays into that, we've got to continue to make sure that there is the economic gravity in tech and bio, I would say R&D. I know Jefferson Moss is absolutely keyed in on this, but we've got to make sure that is not just a regional or statewide center of gravity, but that becomes a national and international center of gravity. You look at Research Triangle, you look at some of these other incredibly important developments and initiatives throughout the world, and this could be just as important as that. I would also add, I think as we develop out the Northwest Quadrant, we have an opportunity there as well, because I think biotech is going to be incredibly important in this state. So, but the Point of the Mountain in particular, the gravity is already centered there, and it's almost become its black hole where it's attracting all of this stuff in. Man, use that, harness it, allow it to help create the economic multipliers that's going to ripple through generations. That's what we need the Point of the Mountain to be. And so it comes at a time where office space and the tech industry right now are at a really interesting point. You'd probably want this to happen 10 years ago or 10 years in the future. It's at a pretty critical tipping point. So I think that's going to be the challenge for the Point, is how do you recreate that gravity for those types of economic focal areas like office space when nobody wants office space right now. And the tech industry is rediscovering itself a little bit, quite frankly.
Yeah, for sure.
And so they're going to have their own challenges there, but I think the opportunity is absolutely worth the investment. And if we get that right, I think it is going to reshape the state of Utah. But again, I would cite that as a very good example of the state, local, universities, everybody working together. When you get everybody working together, then you can make something special happen. You get everybody in their silo, to your point earlier, it's going to fall apart. And so I think hopefully everyone can continue to work together. You start to see little breaks here and there, candidly speaking. But for the most part, I think people are still working together. So
I think the scary part is that not being done right, right? And we have our headquarters in Lehigh. Silicon Slopes does. I love Lehigh. Man, that we screwed that up. Right?
But not Silicon Slopes, hopefully.
No, like the development of it. It's like, how many times have we changed the exits and freeways and all like the various things? Like we were just putting up building after building after building, right? There was really no thought. It's all like box chain restaurants, which is great. All of that's incredible. But you're missing like where we are right now in downtown Provo, this kind of like downtown vibe, this community vibe, all that type of stuff, walking spaces. None of that really exists in Lehigh like it easily could have. Yeah. Because it was a blank canvas. I mean, there's just farmland, right? Yeah. And the fact that, we can't screw this piece up. What ideas have you heard for the Point that you think, that would be really good? That's what we should do.
Well, let me first say, and I think this is going to come into play with the Point as well, but when you have urban planners that go out, and city planners are wonderful, they design the best concepts they can. The economy is going to destroy those concepts every time, because policymakers, local city councils, they're going to chase the business, and that will destroy the best plan no matter what. And I think what we've seen at Point of the Mountain, I think we saw this in Lehigh too, there's going to be that temptation to allow market forces, because we want those good businesses to come in and disrupt the planning that has taken place, which is what we've seen across the state of Utah. I think what Alan's doing now, Alan Matheson, I think this is why he's really wise, the executive director there, is he's really been able to start on that cultural and the feeling and the housing and the retail. And we see what happened in Daybreak, where you had exceptional urban planning take place, and what's happened there. I think you're starting to see those elements and that foundation be put into place at the Point of the Mountain. But Clint, to your question and to answer it directly, if the Point of the Mountain misses its economic potential, then the whole opportunity is gone.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult moment, again, back to office and tech. But if we don't use that to not only lure in the best businesses, to have the best research taking place, I think really good innovation between businesses and the private sector. We've heard about biotech research and development happening there. We've talked about, maybe even some workforce and training. But if we don't capture the economic potential, then we've missed the mark at the point.
Yeah.
So
I agree. When you talk about research happening there, is that like us recruiting like an MIT version, like, or creating our own version of that, or University of Utah or BYU or whoever opening kind of an MIT type of a thing there? Like, how would that work? Is that possible?
Well, and so think about this. If the government had come to Qualtrics and said, hey, we're going to force you to do this, it wouldn't have worked, right? These things have to produce organically, naturally through the private sector. What is it that's really going to provide that black hole center of gravity that's going to pull things in? And so when you use research as part of that gravity, you have to do it the right way, because it's failed miserably all over the world.
Right.
There's a lot of people who've said, not going to name any names, but there's a lot of good examples where they said, we're just going to spend $1 billion, $2 billion, whatever, and we want to recreate the right research here that's going to lure these people in. It doesn't work. Yeah. If it's not very, very intensely focused on what's going to help and draw the private sector, then you're going to miss the purpose of that research. Government research and labs in and of themselves aren't going to move the needle. It's going to be, what is it that attracts the private sector to come in? When you can attract the private sector to come in and really innovate, then you're onto something. Yeah. And I think that's where we've got to get to with the point. It's a little bit more difficult in tech, because there, I think, as you know, you and I've had this conversation, there are natural barriers between government and tech. Yeah. And that's purposeful.
We don't understand each other. Yeah. Almost at all.
Yeah. And so when you start talking, hey, research in tech, it's like, well, let us handle this. The private sector's got this. Yeah. How can you get over some of those barriers, but how can you attract those researchers in the private sector and tech companies, And the best example of this, I think, is when you're in San Francisco, this, you walk into a pizza shop or a coffee shop, you see innovation happening right there. How do you recreate that? And I think that's what you've got to get to with the point where you're creating just natural opportunities for innovation. It's not forced, but it's just facilitated. So, and
how do you make sure you don't become what San Francisco is today?
True story. Yeah.
Which is crazy. Yeah. And I mean, some of our great cities, that's one of the greatest American cities. And to see it in the state that it's in now is really quite sad. I've heard the same is happening in like St. Louis. Like, we've really got to, this is the debate that I would want the people who are like, we're just going to stop it, don't grow at all, just leave it alone. And they kind of stop there. This is the debate I would want them in and thinking about. It's like, hey, we've got these incredible and crazy developments that are going to shape this state for the next 200 years, potentially, right? Like, this is where you want your voice to be heard. One of those would be, do we actually want a Major League Baseball team? The answer to me is obviously yes, right? Like, that's incredible. I love baseball, all that type of stuff. But that's an interesting discussion. Actually, I had Congressman Curtis here, and I was like, hey, how can you get the baseball team, the Major League Baseball team, to be in Utah County? He's like, do you want it in Utah County? I was like, I don't know, actually. I don't know if I want it in Utah County. That is an interesting, these types of things, these types of a Major League Baseball team, which does seem like we're going to get, if we get a hockey team, if we eventually got an NFL team, these various things. I mean, that changes the whole economic structure of a state. Yeah. in ways that are kind of unbelievable. And the Jazz have done an incredible job of being kind of like the front door to Utah. And so there's a real value in it as well.
Yeah. Well, Clint, we're both baseball fans. So let me say this first. There's really good empirical evidence that shows the more amenities, sports options, whatever, the better economy you're going to have. And the reason is because workers are the lifeblood of the economy. The more opportunities they have to have a better quality of life, the better you're going to be able to attract them. And so having more sports options, absolutely critical. Entertainment options. Interestingly enough, outdoor recreation in Utah kind of plays that similar role to attract people. But to your question, because I know we're both baseball fans, I've been an Oakland A's fan forever. And so the last couple of years have been really, really brutal.
You going to follow them to Vegas?
No. Well, not if we got a team in Salt Lake.
Yeah, not if you got a team in Salt Lake.
But we were in Boston last week at Fenway, watched them drop 2 games. And but the whole dynamic there around a baseball team and stadium, and I would actually ask this question back to you, but very interesting location. And it says a lot about sports economics that they chose the location to promote that they are. And the answer I would give to that is it really, really is focusing on the traveling fan. Because we see the stadium in Atlanta is out in the suburbs. You see other places that have put these stadiums out in the suburbs. Here you're really focused on good access, public transportation. You know, it's in a really good place, but it's not in necessarily the center of the population here in the state of Utah. So I think it's a very interesting decision, and I think you have to do it. And so it was, to me, that was a very telling part of this bid, is where they chose to place where they're going to promote that stadium.
By the way, I don't think there's a better stadium than Atlanta's.
Like, really?
Yeah, they've really built a whole ecosystem and city around it. Like, have you ever been to an Atlanta Braves game? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Kind of, you go there and like the whole thing is like, this is just about the Braves. They have hotels that are like, you know, it's unbelievable experience. Like, and like Yankee Stadium is cool. Fenway's obviously historic. Like there's far more historic and more like the Dodger Stadium, those types of things. I don't want to say like, but in terms of like the way it was planned, Atlanta nailed it. Completely nailed it.
Okay, I won't disagree with you on your show, Clint. I hated Atlanta Stadium.
You hated it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
From an urban planning standpoint,
okay, yeah,
I think
this
they
is
hit the nail
interesting.
on the head. From a fan experience, I think they totally missed it.
Yeah, I could see that because I don't live there, so I'm just staying at the hotel, which is literally there, and I'm like, this is sweet.
And that part of it is really convenient. You know, we were in. Sorry, I won't disagree with you, but we were in Fenway.
You can disagree
last
with me, of course.
Dude, Fenway is an incredible stadium. You feel like the whole fan experience. You feel like you're on the field no matter where you're at in the stadium. Petco Park's a good one.
I love San Diego's too. Yeah.
With Atlanta, you think that's kind of the future. That's the way everything's going. And the way I think that makes this bid so strong is they're capturing the ability for the traveling fan, but they also have a little bit of a clean slate. They can design this whole city. So I'm optimistic that you can get the best of Atlanta. You can get the best of like a Fenway experience here in Utah. So I'm really optimistic about that bid.
You think we'll get one?
I hope so, because I need a team to root for that's not the Oakland Athletics now. But it's gonna. I think it's a. I hope we get it. Yeah. I kind of tend to think there's going to be some barriers, but we'll see.
Something that gets left, and we'll wrap this up here in a bit because I've taken a lot of your time here. But something that kind of gets left out in a lot of these conversations is Southern Utah and St. George in particular, and the growth of that. I think it's the fastest growing area in the country, isn't it? Like St. George is unbelievable what they're doing, even from a tech perspective. I'm not sure that the tech community up north understands how great the tech community is down there. Having that now be Utah Tech University is unbelievable. The proximity to Vegas doesn't get talked about as much. Like, it's way closer to Vegas and Salt Lake City, right? And so there's all these like interesting things happening down there that doesn't get talked about. How does St. George and Southern Utah fit into what you're doing with the what's it called? The inland port. Sorry.
You're all good. Yeah. Well, I spent the last week with my nephew who graduated from Utah Tech recently and is employed at a tech company in St. George. And I asked him about this and, you know, why St. George? Why a tech company down there? I was blown away with his response. The confidence of the worker in the St. George Tech scene is impressive, and I think it's going to play well for that industry. People want to
blow up. It already is blowing up. People don't realize, but it could be as big as what's up here in the next 5 years. Like, people have no idea what's going on down there.
Well, I think, in terms of future growth, so our first non-Salt Lake City inland port is actually Cedar City.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's in Iron County, and so we're working with BZI still down there. The university presence between SUU and Utah Tech, I think, is going to really help fuel the economy in that area. And I think that everyone keeps talking about Iron County and Washington County like they're, in other time zones. It's like, look, they're really 45 minutes apart, sometimes less when I'm driving, but they're not as disconnected as people think. And so you've got a good workforce to draw from. You got 2 universities in that same area. You've got proximity to Las Vegas. You got nightlife. Like, I think you've got an opportunity there. Back to this idea of a blank slate. It's starting to develop, but Clint, even there, we've heard people who said we're growing too fast, and I don't like.
Oh, they are
the
growing
traffic.
too fast, actually.
And so, I mean, even there, you've got some of these same challenges where you've just got these cities that are just really, really growing way too quickly. I think that's something that we hope that we can help play a role in. And because really, at the end of the day, when we're talking about transportation logistics, it comes back to urban planning and targeting the right type of economic growth. Is there a willingness to go out and pay? I hate to say it like this, but incentivize and pay for the right companies to come in. How do you make sure that when those companies get to a certain level, they're not going to graduate to Silicon Slopes or somewhere else or have back office, in another country? Ireland, we hear about that all the time. So I think, if you if you play your cards right, and the local elected officials, and we see good collaboration, everyone's working to support the local vision and what's happening there, then I think things will grow the right way and they can do it right. What I hope doesn't happen is that you get just total uncontrolled growth and it destroys quality of life, and all of a sudden workers don't want to be there because you can't get a house. You don't have construction workers. Like, a more sustainable economy is going to be much better for the quality of life in St. George. So I hope that's the direction they go. But, Clint, no, I don't think people really understand what's happening down there.
No, not at all. I would not want to be the mayor of St. George right now, because that place is great. I think it is. Like, I'm someone who's all for growth. Again, like I've been saying, like, kind of no choice. It kind of is growing too fast down there. It's pretty good. The traffic in St. George is crazy.
Yeah. But you hear about these new cities, right? I mean, that's been the popular concept as of late. I mean, talk about that in relationship, you could even do it in St. George City. But you talk about this whole new... I don't want to say it like this. I mean, you look at Cairo. They built a whole new city next to Cairo. I mean, in St. George, you really could... You've got so much room to play, and I think a lot.
Get out to Ivans or some of these other
spread it out, create the right density in the right places so people know where density's coming. I mean, plan around that so you don't have to build new interchanges and so freeway interchanges, where you can implement good mass transit. I mean, those are the things that will make sure that it's growing sustainably. So,
when are you going to run for office? How long are you going to do this?
After you do.
No, I'm not.
I shouldn't say that. I don't know when you're going to run.
I'll never run for office.
Why not?
But you have experience. You actually know this stuff. I'm just an idiot with the microphone over here. I honestly think you should run for some sort of office. Like, you've been an incredible public servant, and you've been in the trenches in the governor's office, and now with the inland port and everything else that you're doing. I mean, how long do you think you'll do inland port, and what would be next for you?
Well, I loved working for Governor Herbert. I loved working for Governor Cox. The opportunity to work with both those gentlemen was phenomenal. I got a chance to work with John Pierpont, at DWS, Workforce Services. It's been a really varied career, and I feel really fortunate for that. But Clint, if we get the inland port right, and I love the point of the mountain, but it's the point of the mountain. It's one geographical area.
Exactly.
We as the port have a chance to provide a transformational impact on the state of Utah, on the economy, on the logistics and transportation. We have a chance to make a much brighter future environmentally for our kids. Like, if I live my life and I'm a politician, I don't care. If I live my life and I can make this state better, like, that's the stuff that will get me to the end of the career without getting bored. And honestly, at the governor's office, I felt like it was probably time for a change so that I could allow Ryan Starks. It wasn't me; he earned it on his own. Yeah. But to get out of other people's ways and to be able to come over to the port and try and do something and create some inertia in a place where I didn't feel like it was happening, but had all the potential. Yeah. So, Clint, if you and I can make the state better, like then I can retire happy and move to Scotland and, whatever. I don't know what my future will hold, but I hope I can retire and say I made a difference.
Yeah.
If I retire and say I was a politician, I'll feel like a failure.
Yeah.
That's me.
There's really no upside to being a politician, it doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
It's a pretty thankless job. Yeah. Anyway, Ben, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for everything you're doing. You're working on the most important project in the whole state of Utah with the inland poor. Best of luck with that. How should people, like, if they want to give feedback to you or ask you questions or get in touch with you on various things, how could they do that?
I'm going to give my email address. This is my email address, BLH, B as in Ben, LH, at utah.gov. So email me if you got anything you want to say. Just Google inland port. I'm not going to say ignore the articles. It's good reading and educational reading for where we've been. But our website, come check us out. We're happy to help educate. And honestly, any question anybody has, we're happy to help with. And so I try and respond quickly, try and be responsive. But the other thing I would say is, Clint, people don't know the good work that you're doing and the ability to promote the market, the tech industry, not just the tech industry, but the workers associated with that, but a lot of other industries as well. Utah is not Utah without the Silicon Slopes organization and specifically without you, Clint. So
you're very kind.
You're a good man. Thank you for all you're doing. And I'm sure we'll keep changing the state one day at a time.
Yeah, we'll have you back on soon. Thanks, my friend.
Thank you, sir.